Today we're going to talk about multiplying terms. So, do you remember what the four parts of a term are? If not, go ahead and go back, look for the video on the four parts of a term or understanding terms. There are four parts to a term. So say it with me. Sign, constant or coefficient, exponent, and variable. Sign, constant, coefficient, exponent, variable. Sign, constant or coefficient, exponent, variable. One last time. Sign, constant or coefficient, exponent, and variable. So there are three steps that we have to look at in order to multiply terms. First one is we're going to be multiplying the signs. So for the signs here, we've got here the second part of multiplying coefficients and constants. Remember the coefficient and constant, if you haven't watched the video on understanding terms, you should. We've got the coefficients here. These are called coefficients because they have a variable next to them. Otherwise, they'd be called a constant. Again, coefficients are always a number. So we'll first multiply the signs, then we multiply the coefficients, and lastly, we multiply the variables. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And again, the best way to do it is going from left to right. So the sign, then the coefficient, then the variables. So let's look here. All right, so first we're going to multiply the signs. Here we've got a negative sign, and here we have a negative sign. And there's a lot of different ways to figure this out. If you have an odd number of negative signs, then that's going to equal a negative answer. If you have an even number of negative signs, then you're going to have a plus. So here we have one negative sign and two negative signs, and 2 is a positive. So we're going to have positive for our answer. So let's go ahead and look at the next part. Positive, or two negatives equal a positive. The next part after we multiplied that, now remember, we don't have to draw the positive sign. We would if it was the negative, but positive signs are invisible, so we don't have to draw that. What we're going to do here now is look at multiplying the coefficients, okay? Here the coefficient, again, the coefficient is just the number. It's not 3r, it's not 2r. Coefficient is called a coefficient because it's next to a variable, but it's only referring to the number. So here we look at 3 times 2. 3 times 2 is 6. After we multiply the coefficients, next thing we're going to do is multiply the variables. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, we can't multiply them because these are not like terms. And you're right, they're not. When you're multiplying and dividing, it doesn't matter if they're not like terms. Like terms only matter if you're adding or subtracting. So if we were adding negative 3r and we're going to add it to negative 2r squared, we could not do that. We couldn't even subtract negative 3r minus negative 2r squared because they're not like terms. They don't have the same variable. But in multiplication and division, we can, and we do. So here we have this variable and this variable. Now again, in order to multiply, multiplication refers to has to do with exponents. So r to the second power means that we are multiplying r times r. So there's two r's and we're multiplying together. What coefficient does this one have? Well, it has an invisible 1 right here. And this just means that we are multiplying 1r. So if we're multiplying 1r, and here if we're multiplying 1r, and we're multiplying 2r's, then together that means we are multiplying 3r's. So r to the third power. And so here we look, this is our answer. So recap, first we multiplied the signs. Here's the sign is negative, this is negative. Since we have two negatives and 2 is even, that means it's a positive, and positives are invisible. Then we went over and multiplied the coefficients, and 3 times 2 is 6. And lastly, we multiplied the variables. We had r to the first power and r to the second power. Together, that makes it r to the third power. And that's how you multiply terms. Now that we know the steps, let's look at some different examples of multiplying. So here, let's say we've got 2a multiplied by 3, or let's do negative 3a. What is it going to be? Pause it and see if you can write it out. Okay, so the answer here, we look at the signs. The sign here is positive, so we've got a positive. And the sign here is negative, so we have a negative. What does that mean? If we have an odd number, which we only have one negative sign, so we have an odd number of negative signs, that means it's going to be negative. Our answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to write this out here, the negative sign. Next, we're going to look at the coefficients. Here, the coefficient is 2. Here, the coefficient is 3. What's 3 times 2? 6. And lastly, we look at the variable. Here we've got 1a, and here we've got another a. What are the exponents? Well, we've got an invisible 1 here and an invisible 1 here. So if we're multiplying 1a and multiplying 1a, 1 plus 1 is 2. So that makes it a to the second power. So our answer is negative 6a squared, or negative 6a to the second power. Let's look at another one. What if we have 2r multiplied by 4? Pause it, see if you can figure this out. All right, so first let's look at it. What is the sign over here on this term? It's positive. There's an invisible plus sign here. And here, what's the sign? Also an invisible plus sign. So we have 2 plus signs. And if we have 2 plus signs, there are no negative signs. So our answer is going to be positive, because 2 positives will, so there's no negative signs, or if it's an even number of negative signs, then it's positive. Now, let's look at the coefficients. We have 2, and this 4 is a constant. 2 times 4 is 8. Perfect. Next, let's look at the variables. Here we've got 1r, that's to the first power. Here we don't even have a variable. So when we don't have a variable, then this variable is just going to nicely slide in right here. So we have r, 8r. That's our answer, 8r. Now, let's look at this one, okay? See if you can do this. We've got negative 4r times by negative 5y. See if you can figure that one out. Okay, perfect. So let's look at the signs first. We've got a negative and we've got another negative. So 2 negatives, that's an even number of negatives. So that means our answer is going to be positive. I'm not going to write the positive because positive signs are invisible unless they turn into addition signs. So, and here that's not happening. Next, we're going to look at the coefficient. Coefficient 4 times by 5 is 20. Next, I've got r to the first power and y to the first power. What do? Well, I'm going to write my r to the first power here because that's just going to slip in over here And again, I don't have to write to the first power because when it's to the first power, it's invisible. And now this y, which is also to the first power, we're going to slip this over here. So the answer is 20 ry. Remember, invisible multiplication signs in between each of these. 20 times r times y.